Many soldiers have been stationed in Marylebone, and when the long wars with Boney came to an end, they were no longer needed. Having risked their lives for king and country, they found themselves out on the streets looking for work. Lots of ex-soldiers used to hang around the Baker Street Bazaar, close to the King Street Cavalry Barracks. I met and befriended one of them, an ex-lifeguard, John Harrison. We had a lot in common. We were both ex-servicemen of the same age, but more importantly, we shared the same radical view of how society needed to change. After taking the King's shilling, John wasn't sent overseas at first. The lifeguards were the King's bodyguards, which meant they were permanently based in London, guarding not only the King, but the homes of the rich and powerful politicians. For an ordinary lad from Derbyshire, John hated being on the side of those who were taking away ancient freedoms from the people who dated back to Magna Carta. Fearful of revolution, the government suppressed free speech, stopped crowds gathering to protest, and had allowed imprisonment without trials by suspending habeas corpus. When Westminster's radical MP, Sir Francis Burnett, challenged this, the lifeguards were ordered to escort him to the Tower of London and open fire on anyone trying to stop them. John told me the closer he got to royalty, the more radical he became. As a lifeguard, John saw Mad King George and his extravagant son, the Prince Regent, up close and wasn't impressed. It made him question how the country was run. He lost all respect for the monarchy the day he was ordered to buy a new uniform and parade at the Regency fete at Carlton House. Whilst Londoners begged on the streets for food, the Prince's guests were served a banquet on tables carrying streams of tropical fish. When they staggered away drunk, the lifeguards were fed their scraps and leftovers. John eventually fought abroad in the Peninsular Wars in Portugal and Spain before leaving in the lifeguards to return to London in 1814. He resumed his old profession as a baker and saw how many struggled to afford his bread. This was because Lord Liverpool's government of landowners put such a high tax on imported wheat. In Regency Britain, fewer than 800 people own 51% of the land. People want rid of the Corn Laws, but only those with property can vote, and this means Parliament is in the hands of the landowners. Both John and I were followers of the late Thomas Spence. He believed in votes for all and the common ownership of the land. He spread his ideas via tokens and a weekly publication, Pig's Meat, that argued working people were not the swinish multitude, too pig-ignorant to be trusted with the vote. He had sought reform as a member of the London Corresponding Society, but after they were banned, he had favoured following the French with a revolution. Spence was imprisoned for treason for selling the banned book, The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine. But this didn't stop him trying to put forward his ideas. He wouldn't be silenced and continued to give away tokens campaigning against slavery and seeking equality for all. Throughout the country, public meetings were held calling for change. Their theme was equality, liberty, and fraternity, demanding an end to tyranny. On the 16th of August 1819, St Petersfield, Manchester, played host to an outrage against over 60,000 peaceful protesters who were demanding that a city of 100,000 people should have a voice in Parliament. An estimated 18 people, including 4 women and a child, died from sabre cuts and trampling. Nearly 700 men, women and children received extremely serious injuries. The government had shown they would put down any calls for liberty with brutal violence. After the Manchester Massacre, the government passed the 6 Acts, which made mass protest illegal. Newspapers were censored and taxed to keep the truth from ordinary Britons. In defiance to this, John encouraged me to join the Marylebone Union Reading Society, where we read the Manchester Observer's account of the Peterloo Massacre. Peaceful protest was now impossible. For Lord Liverpool's government, liberty meant cavalry. Equality meant infantry. And fraternity meant artillery. John introduced me to men who believed that if our masters refused us equality, then we just have to take it. The Marylebone Union Society met at the home of the schoolmaster Thomas Hazard in Queen Street, Edgware Road. We paid twopence a week, and this allowed us to read the works of Thomas Paine at our Monday meetings, as well as the daily newspapers. One man seemed to lead most of the political debate, and that was Arthur Thistlewood. Through him, most of us became committed Spencean philanthropists, a group dedicated to overthrowing Lord Liverpool's corrupt and repressive government and forging a new nation based on the principles of Thomas Spence. Arthur came from a family of Lincolnshire farmers. His grandfather's brother, Thomas, had been a Jamaican slave owner. But Arthur abhorred slavery and wanted to end it completely. He had some notoriety, as uniquely he had served as an officer in both the British and French Revolutionary armies. In 1816, he had been tried and then acquitted of treason for leading the Spa-Field riots, which sought to overthrow the government by seizing the Tower of London and the Bank of England. Arthur and his Spencean friends failed because they couldn't persuade the Tower of London's guards to join their revolution. I also met Robert Wedderburn at the Marylebone Union Reading Rooms. We were both mulatto Jamaicans, and he, like me, had also served in the Royal Navy. He had come to London aged 17 and lived amongst the London Blackbirds in the notorious St Giles Rookery. This was a strong community of former slaves, Jamaican sailors and Irish immigrants, who, despite their poverty, could live in freedom for the first time in their lives. After Peterloo, Robert publicly called the Prince Regent and his government bloody tyrants and urged us to overthrow him. At the start of 1819, I was struggling. I could not find work as a cabinet maker, and after not earning a single penny for 18 months, I had been forced to pawn my tools to feed my family. By the end of the year, many of us were so hungry and desperate that we eagerly took up Thistlewood's call for revolution. I used the pretence of redeeming my tools to buy a blunderbuss, using a 30-shilling grant for the Society for the Suppression of Mendicity. Most of my fellow Spenceans were ordinary workers who'd spent time under the colours of soldiers or sailors. I began hosting meetings for them on Sunday mornings, where we prepare what we believe might be the fight to come by practicing drilling. I also acted as a steward when Thistlewood held public meetings. He would tell those gathered to hear him that we were not alone, as working people all over the country were readying themselves for the struggle ahead. Only landowners could vote, so it was very hard for anyone seeking reform to get elected to Parliament. Westminster was one of the only places where a radical could get elected because it had so many modest shopkeepers and businessmen who could vote. We all knew the reformer John Cam Hobhouse, so when he stood in the December 1819 election, I attended the Covent Garden hustings and showed my support by wearing a black skull and crossbones banner inscribed, "Let us die like men, not be sold like slaves." Supporters of the other candidates tried to seize the banner from me, but I fought them all off.